The middle of Parak Lamed Ches, page Nun on top, 182 at the bottom. Okay. Let's see where we should start from. Okay. We're going to start 10 lines in the bottom of the page. The Alter Rebbe is explaining, well, we learned that part, we're going to go through it quickly. The Alter Rebbe is explaining that even though the purpose of mitzvahs is to elevate the physical world, and therefore mitzvahs must be done physically, nevertheless, we say that if you daven or make a bracha without intent, it's like you have a body without a soul. Okay, so he says if the main thing is the action, the verbal articulation, so why do you need the kavanah? Why do you need the intent? So the Alter Rebbe started explaining that everything in the world has a soul. Even an inanimate object has a soul. And the Alter Rebbe is explaining like this. The fact that everything is in this world, which is a world of concealment, therefore, in a certain aspect, everything in the world is equal. They're all concealment from God. Nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe is going to start explaining now, there's still a difference between inanimate, plant, animal, and human. Even though in reality, none of them feels God. They give a mashal lessons of Tanya. You can have a thick wall blocking the light. Okay? Everything on the other side of the wall is dark, equally dark, no matter what it is. But sometimes you can have a wall that you have a crack in the wall open, and light comes in there. So it's not the same concealment. Light comes in there. So the Alter Rebbe is going to explain this. From one side, everything in this world is in this world, which is a world of concealment. Nevertheless, there is difference. And he says, okay, we're gonna start 8 lines in the bottom of the page. It says, Ki shneim me'elam haza, everything is from this world. Shabachlalusi, generally speaking, mistater b'shava, everything in this world is the revelation of Ur v'chayis, the light and revelation of Hashem. Shemeruach previous part that comes from Hashem's spirit is hesed upon him, concealment. B'yeridas hamadregas, and the descent of the levels. B'shtaushlis ha'elamis, from the chain of the world. Mi madrega la madrega, from level to level. B'tzumtzumim rabim v'atzumim, with tremendous concealments and contractions and limitations. Achin islabish b'klipas neiga, until it comes into the neutral level of evil. I'll explain in a second. Lahachi is klolos elam azachum. Okay, we started talking about this last week. Godliness comes into the world. Okay, so godliness, in order to come into a finite world, infinite God still needs to become finite. That means he has to limit himself to come into a finite world. In that respect, everything in the world is finite. It's limited. And therefore, finite is a concealment of infinite. Infinite is infinite and revelation, and this is concealment. So what happens is, so even though everything is equal, but how does God sustain evil? There's a process. God goes through klipas noga. Remember we said noga is an evil, it's evil, but there shines within it a little bit of good. Klipas noga means every permissible object that exists in the world that a Jew is allowed to use. Some things you can eat, some things you're not allowed to eat, but you can benefit from. The bottom line is things that a Jew is permitted to use in this world is not Kedusha, it's not holy, and therefore if it's not holy, it's automatically evil. But it's a neutral level of evil that you could elevate to Kedusha. the spark of Kedusha in it could be elevated. And therefore, like we learned earlier in Tanya, things that are permissible are called, in Hebrew, Dvarim Mutarim, permissible things. Mutar means permissible. Mutar also means untied, Matir Asurim, untied the prisoners. When you undo your shoes, it's called Matir Hana'olim. You undo the shoes. You undo the tying. What does it mean, untied? The Kedusha, the spark of God. Remember, everything has a spark of God. Everything that's permissible, the spark of God that keeps it existing is not bound to the evil. It's not bound to evil. It's loose. So therefore, when you eat it with the bracha properly, you use it properly, you're elevating that spark of Kedusha, of holiness, that's in the apple, and you're elevating it to Kedusha. So you actually, Avedus HaBiruri means you're doing selection. You're selecting the spark and removing the spark of holiness that's in that permissible object, and you're elevating it to Kedusha. Shalosh Klipos HaTameis, something which is completely evil, it's called Shalosh Klipos HaTameis, for whatever reason, there's 3 klipos. Those are Asur. What does Asur mean? The Kedusha that's in there is so bound to evil, no matter what you're going to do with it, you will not be able to elevate it because it's bound, it's tied. You can't untie it until Mashiach comes. Or with a super level of tshuva that Aveirus become mitzvahs, but that's not realistic. So therefore, how does Hashem, here Dr. Rebbe is saying like this, how does Hashem sustain total evil? So he says, Hashem first comes into the neutral level of evil, and then from there, it can go a step lower into total evil. That means that Kedusha is sustaining total evil through Klipas Neiga. That's what he's saying over here. It says, I know call Dvarim HaMutarim, Sheba Olam Hazeh, 3 lines in the end of the page. All the permissible things. Comes the Kedusha comes in there. Umimena, and in it, Val Yodan, through it, Mushpoim Dvarim HaTmeim, all the evil things in the world are sustained. Ki Bechinas Memutzas, because Klipas Neiga, this neutral level of evil, is the intermediary between good and bad. Okay, so now he says like this. So seemingly everything in this world is bad. It's all concealed godliness. When Mashiach comes, evil will be removed, which means evil will be transformed to Kedusha, correct? When Mashiach comes, evil will be Kedusha. Total evil will become Kedusha. Now our Aveda is to take neutral evil and make it holy. Also a transformation of evil, but it's evil that's elevatable. So now we're also elevating darkness to light when we do mitzvahs, like you said before in the last few chapters. We're elevating the physical world when we do mitzvahs. But then it also, what it accomplishes is that it gives life to total evil also. That evil is sustained from it. That will be elevated when Mashiach comes. Not before that. But here he says, the bottom line of page Nun. Alpha became, nevertheless, this revelation of godliness that comes into the world, Asher Hashem meir umachaya, that Hashem gives light to and sustains, derech levush, through the garment of Klipas Neiga, Eina shava b'kulam b'chinas simsim v'espashus. Here, I'll going to say something very simple. The godliness which is in a human is greater than the godliness in an animal, which is greater than the godliness in a plant, which is greater than the godliness in an inanimate object. So even though from one side everything is equal, it's all a concealment of godliness that allowed the physical limited world to become created, compared to the infinite God, it's a limitation, concealment. We're all limited and concealment of godliness. Nevertheless, there's still a difference in the life of inanimate, plant, animal, and human, which means there's a greater revelation of godliness in people than animals, than plant, and then lowest is inanimate. He says, Ki begufa gashmi, because in the physical body, ba'adayim mamish, and total inanimate, like avonim va'afod, dirt and stones, ha'are bechinas simtsum godol, there's a tremendous concealment and limitation and hiding of godliness. Asher en kamaya, which is not at all similar in anything else in the world. V'achaya shabai, and the life that God sustains, the physical body, inanimate, and things like that. Mu'etis kol kach is so limited. Shein bayafilu kerechat semeach, it can't even grow. That means it's such a limit, inanimate. It's such a lower level of godliness. Yes, granted, everything that exists in the world is all a concealment of godliness. But even in this concealment, Alter Rebbe is saying now, there's still a big difference between the inanimate, that nothing is there, visible, and in plant life. In plant life, the concealment is not as great as inanimate, because it moves, it grows, it can function. The derech klal, generally speaking, this level is divided into 4 categories. Daimem, semeach, chai, medaber. Like we discussed before, inanimate, plant, animal, and human. Keneged dalet eisir shem havaya baruch, corresponding with the 4 letters of God's name. Shemimenu mishpoim, that from the 4 letters of God's name, these physical things are sustained. Let me explain an additional thing over here. The 4 worlds, the spiritual worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, and Asir, okay, are connected to the 4 letters of God's name. Yud, which is Chochmah, is revealed in Atzilus. Hey, which is Bina, is revealed in Bria. Vav, which is the 6 Midas, are revealed in Yitzira. Hey is revealed into the world of Asir. Okay, Malchus. These are 4 spiritual worlds. Okay? These 4 spiritual worlds are also inanimate, plant, animal, human in a spiritual state. Meaning, the world Atzilus, which is an infinite emanation of godliness, it's just 10 levels, but each one is infinite. That's like the person. Bria, which is a lower level, is like the animal. Yitzira, which is lower, is like the plant. And this world, Asir, not the physical, the spiritual world, is also inanimate. Now, obviously, there's a greater revelation of godliness in Atzilus than there is in Bria and in Yitzira and Asir. The same thing in this world. There's a greater revelation of godliness in people than there is in animals or plants or human or inanimate. And he says like this. And just like you can't compare the revelation of life. You can't compare the revelation of life that inanimate or even for that matter plant have. You can't compare the life, the vitality that there is in an inanimate and plant to the vitality that exists in animal and human. You can't compare them. Even though, like we said before, everything in this world is still a limitation and concealment of God, which it has to panim, which is the garment of Nega. But he says, nevertheless, in the direct life in this world that Hashem gives, in other words, where's Alter Rebbe heading here? Alter Rebbe is explaining why a mitzvah without intent is like a body without a soul. So the Alter Rebbe is going to be explaining that kavanah is a more spiritual thing, just like a human has more spiritual life than plant and inanimate. So the same thing, kavanah of a mitzvah is the soul of the mitzvah. There is a soul in inanimate, like the Arizal says, a stone also has a soul, because there's a power of God keeping it in existence. If it doesn't have the power of God in it to keep it in existence, it doesn't exist. But this soul, this power that Hashem gives it, is an inanimate soul. It can't move, it can't grow, it can't do anything. It just exists. Inanimate just exists. Unless if a person picks it up and moves it, But inanimate is a non-movable object. It can't move anywhere because the power of Hashem in it is so limited. It's like, yes, it exists, but that's it. Plant more. But there's a big difference even between plant and animal. Plants only grow when they're in their source, in the ground. Afterwards, you cut it, they die eventually. Animals could walk around. They're not connected to their original source. They're not constantly connected to their mother. The animals, they give birth, they're out. That's it. They're on their own now. They go, they move, they walk. They function on instinct. Not seichel, but they function on instinct. That's a much greater revelation of God in it, a power of Hashem in it, that makes it the animal that it is. Much greater than the plant, which is much greater than the inanimate. Topping it all off is the life of a person that has intellect, rationale, seichel, using the head. So he says like this. So therefore he's like, we can't compare it all. The revelation of Hashem, which is the real will of Hashem. You can't compare. Okay, let me say it outside, no see it inside. Now, the Rebbe says you can't compare the godliness that's revealed in a physical mitzvah, which is basically an inanimate object by itself, to the power of Hashem that's in the intent of the mitzvah, which is the person's thinking. Yes, the physical mitzvah is like an inanimate object. But the kavanah of the mitzvah, he says, you can't compare it, or even mitzvahs akliyas b'dibur, even mitzvahs that you speak. Ubeitis v'sayim, or just moving your lips, b'li kavanah, like you don't even realize you're moving it. Shinachshav kamaisim mamish, you can't compare action compared to the revelation of godliness, hami'idu mislabesh b'kavanas and mitzvahs ma'asiyos, that a person thinks when they do it to fulfill the will of Hashem. In other words, what's the Alter Rebbe saying? It's deep, yes, but let's try to simplify it to the best of anybody's ability. Try to understand it. The ultimate goal is to transform the physical to Kedusha. That's why Hashem created the world. He wanted a Dirvat Aftani. He wants us to elevate the physical objects of the world, the inanimate, plant, animal objects of the world, and elevate it to God. And that inanimate, plant, animal that a Jew is elevating to godliness has a soul. And that soul is different in the inanimate, plant, and the animal. But what's the most refined level in the world of the concealment that exists equally in the world? What is the ultimate greatness of the world? Is the person. What is the greatest faculty of the person? The mind. That is the highest faculty. Even within the human body, the highest faculty, what makes a human unique, is that we have seichel. We can have kavanah. We can have intent. Therefore, what's the first bracha after the initial 3 brachas of Shemona Esrei praising Hashem? During the week, what is the fourth bracha? But it's the first of the requests. Ata choinen la'adam das. You gave us brains, please. Chaneinu mi'itcha. Please grant us from yourself chachma bina and das. Why is that the first bracha? Our sages tell us, because the uniqueness of a person is that he has brains. So what's the first bracha that we're saying? Thank you for giving me that I'm a human being, that I have a brain. That brain, when it's involved in the mitzvah, meaning it has kavanah. So yes, you're moving your lips, which is seemingly inanimate, relatively speaking. And Hashem, he said before, even verbal mitzvahs are physical mitzvahs because you're verbally articulating it with your physical mouth. But what's the most spiritual part of the person? The brain. The blood is, but the brain is the most spiritual, as in spirit, nefesh. The most spiritual part of the person's body is the brain. And that level of godliness that we have in the intent is actually the ultimate soul of the physical mitzvah that we did. So yes, therefore the Chazal tell us, you do a mitzvah without kavanah, it's like a body without a soul. What is the soul of that physical mitzvah? Yes, the physical mitzvah has its own soul, but it's a much lower level of a soul than the human has. You might eat a piece of matzah that came from plant. You might drink a cup of water and make a brach on it, so it's inanimate. You might eat meat on Shabbos and Yom Tov, which is a mitzvah to eat. So that's the meat. But what's the ultimate? What's the ultimate level of a soul? The ultimate level of the soul is the person's brain. And therefore, what Hashem wants is in that physical object that we are elevating to godliness, that has really its own soul of inanimate plant animal, but it's a limited soul. Hashem wants that we should bring life into it with the kavanah. And therefore, the intent of the mitzvah is actually the life and the vitality of the mitzvah. Even though it's not a contradiction now to Rabbi said. The ultimate purpose is to elevate the world. But we want to elevate the world with a spirituality to it, that it should be able to fly, have a spirit in it, so to speak, that the mitzvah should fly up. And that's why kavanah is so important. And therefore he says like this, Sha'adam miskaven basiyos, when a person does a mitzvah, and their intent is l'dafka b'yizbarach, to cling to God, by doing the will of Hashem, and hu d'tzayni echad, my will, and Hashem and His will are one. So if I'm connecting to Hashem's will, and I understand what it's all about, let me paraphrase this. I do a mitzvah. Okay, I'm doing what Hashem wants. Okay, Hashem told me to do what I'm doing. But when I realize that Hashem wants me to do this, so I'm fulfilling Hashem's will, which is synonymous with Hashem himself, because Hashem and his will are one. So if you're talking about the ultimate connection, openly felt living connection, is when you have kavanah of the mitzvah, because then you're taking that physical object, you're utilizing that object to fulfill the will of Hashem, and that will of Hashem in the kavanah, you realize, what does that mean? I'm doing it because Hashem wants me to do it. I'm fulfilling Hashem's will, and Hashem and His will are one. So when I do Hashem's will, me and Hashem become one because I'm connecting to his will. His will is one. So therefore, what happens when a person does a mitzvah? The realization that I'm connecting to the essence of Hashem when I do a mitzvah, that's the kavanah, that's the soul of the mitzvah, that's the life of the mitzvah. Yes, even if I don't have kavanah, I'm taking this physical object and I'm doing a mitzvah with it. Okay, but where's the life of it? The life you need. That's the kavanah. And if you don't have kavanah, the Gemara says it's like a soul without a body. I'm sorry, a body without a soul, because it's not alive. A Jew needs to understand that when we do a mitzvah, what happens? What am I accomplishing? Stop a person in the street, okay? Why are you doing a mitzvah? God told me to do it. Okay, so what happened? What happens? What happens when you do the mitzvah? That's where the kavanah comes in. What am I accomplishing by doing the mitzvah? I'm accomplishing by doing the mitzvahs that Hashem wanted me, this physical human being with a body and soul and a Yetzer Hara and everything else, to take this physical object that Hashem created because he wants to make that physical object the dwelling place for Hashem, to reveal godliness. And therefore, when I do a mitzvah, I'm realizing I'm taking this physical object that Hashem wants me to take. And I'm doing it because this is what Hashem wants. And because I'm doing what Hashem wants, therefore I'm connecting to the will of Hashem. And therefore, the will of Hashem is one with Hashem. Therefore, what am I doing? I'm connecting to the essence of Hashem. You know, when if a person in the street, so to speak, would realize what is accomplished by a mitzvah, they would do much more mitzvahs. What are you connecting to? Finite becoming infinite, creation becoming creator. That's a phenomenon, but that's through the kavanah of the mitzvah. That's what makes the mitzvah alive in a way that we realize putting a greater soul into the physical object of the mitzvah that has a much lesser soul than the human soul. And now the human soul is putting this godliness into the physical object, and then it becomes one with Hashem. Okay, have a good Shabbos. Don't Chodesh tonight. Tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh. Everybody have a great week, and we'll see you Mitzvah night.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Shabbos.